Today was just a continuation of what I've been doing for the past few days, which is just going through the second round of edits on my novel. As you'll see in the video here, a lot of it just me looking back at my notes that I keep, like my handwritten notes on the pages there, and then just making the corrections on the Word document. It's a very boring process. I mean, all of writing in some ways is very, very boring, but this seems to be probably one of the worst, one of the most boring parts, I guess. But going back through it's interesting though to see how many mistakes that I've made in this novel that I've made before. Just going through it, one of the very clear things that I've done, and one of the big fixes that I'm trying to make is, with my own writing, I tend to rely a lot more on summary than I do on scene, and it's something I've done somewhat pretty pervasively throughout most of my past few years of writing. I originally, when I started writing originally, I took sort of the advice of the show don't tell advice. So everything I was doing was in scene. So everything was seen. There was almost no summary in any of my works, and these chapters just went forever and forever and forever. And so I had auto corrected or I guess overcorrected. And what I'd done is I started doing a lot more summary sections and a lot less scenes to kind of fix that. But now I've realized that I am continually writing chapters that need scenes as summaries. So the entire spectrum basically I've basically run where I went from one to overcorrecting to the other. And it's just interesting that I did it this time as well, where I've realized that for several of my other novels that I wrote before this, I've been doing that as well. So it's just something that I've been continually doing. It's a mistake that I've been continually making throughout most of my writing, which is when I guess when I do my first drafts, when I initially write these things out, I tend to sort of rely on summaries. And I think when you're writing, especially like your first years of writing, I mean, so much of so much I think of people's, I guess, delay in getting published or delay in kind of moving forward their writing is that they keep on making those same sort of mistakes over and over again. I didn't, I obviously didn't learn from my first novel I did where I was relying on too much summary. I didn't learn from obviously the second one, and now I'm not sure if this is the third or the fourth novel I've worked on where I've done that, but it's very, very apparent now that that I have not learned. And this is probably true, I think, of most writers in a sense, in that a lot of the early stage of writing is just beating these bad habits out of you and being so too stubborn to realize you're making the mistake and to change it. So it's not even that you don't realize you're making a mistake, but it's that you realize you're making the mistake, but emotionally you don't retain that, you don't intuit it, and you keep going forward with every new project, making these same sort of mistakes. Because in some ways, I think some writers are very, very bullheaded. Other times, I think people just tend to forget. And so I really do think that a lot of the early years of writing is just beating these bad habits out of you. It's just making these mistakes so many times that you get exasperated and you finally go, okay, next time I am not doing this again. The next novel I write, I am not relying as much on summary as I will on scene, because every time my writing style employs this, it doesn't sound as good, and I need to fix that. And if someone, I think if people can sort of correct their mistakes the first time, if they can go through in their first their first novel, really examine what they've done, or the first couple that you end up writing. Because I mean, inevitably I think it's very rare that people's first couple novels that they actually pen ever get published. I think someone's debut is usually like the sixth, seventh, eighth, their dozenth novel maybe that they've actually done in their life. And so I think a lot of the early stages, those early years, it really is just a matter of just beating those bad habits. The reason why you stay there is you've got so many bad habits that you probably do recognize, but you don't know how to fix. You keep making the mistake, or you just emotionally don't want to change, and so you keep on encountering these problems as you go through, and you have to kind of just keep sort of beating yourself over the head with it until finally you get basically tired, and you go forward and you make those kind of corrections. Yeah, and so I mean, if you're someone basically maybe who's is in that earlier stage, and you're trying to maybe shortcut that process, take that time away, that'd be a big thing. Would just be learning from your mistakes the first time, like seeing what you did wrong in the first novel, and trying as hard as you can to avoid repeating it. Um, Again, I have, I mean, a lot of it's unconscious. I mean, I don't really realize that I'm making this mistake till I go back through them, until you read through your work, and then you go, oh crap, that's, yep, I did that again. I made that mistake again. I need to go back through and make all these corrections again. These are things that can't be, these things are obviously that can be fixed. Any kind of summary can basically be converted into a scene for the most part, so it's not like I can't fix it. It doesn't take the most amount of time away, I guess, but so many of these small things, I think we're just kept in this sort of like beginning intermediate stage for so long, just because we're making these same sort of mistakes and not being willing to correct that and go forward. And I don't know if doing fixing those very early on saves you years. I don't know. I don't know if it takes months off your time to get published. I don't know if it takes years off. I don't know. Um, the whole process is just a learning process. So maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But that's something I'm seeing now. Something I'm learning now is, if you're making the same mistakes in your writing that you made, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before, you're making those same mistakes. It's like you need to address those, I think, first with your writing, and then try and go from there. Because if there were a problem 5 years ago and you haven't changed it, it's could be the thing that's holding you back. Could be the thing that's making your writing from going to that very next level. There's a saying that when it comes to someone's career, their 20s isn't to figure out what they want to do with their lives, but someone's 20s are to figure out what they don't want to do with their lives. And that's kind of the same with writing. I mean, your early years of writing are not to sort of find out what you're really good at, but a lot of it is just to figure out what style of writing you might enjoy. Go through and try different styles and fail at so many different styles of writing. Minimalist, different ways of writing these novels, trying them all, and then figuring out, okay, well, I want to write like this guy instead, and then making the mistakes, figuring out what all of your mistakes are with your writing. And then as basically years go by, you start to correct, you start to make these adjustments. It's not as, I mentioned a little bit earlier that maybe you can shave months and years off the process by doing this early. It could be something though where it just takes years. It takes years to just make those corrections, to just really recognize them and develop a way to make the corrections. So it's not so much identifying it, but developing a means of addressing those problems instead. And so as I go through this, I'm just reminded that it can be very, very humbling to see that. It can be very, very humbling to see the same mistakes you were making years before, because I go through periods where I get a bit big headed. I go through periods where I think my writing's really, really, really wicked strong, and then I see these same mistakes that I was making even a few years ago, and it's a good reminder that yeah, your writing's improving, you're getting better, but you still have a ways to go.